So I hope you will cut me a little slack tonight if I have a little bit of a rallying tone. I know it's election season, but this topic is really personal to me. I want to share with you a story about my uncle who founded a small but rather special organization. He started with a really good idea. He had about 13 locations, and it wasn't easy, but with significant hard work, he eventually built it up into a national brand whose name you would recognize. And along the way, as he prospered, however, he had a ton of people working for him. He couldn't obviously oversee all the departments, make all the decisions. It grew and grew, and by most definitions, it was a great success. But at some point, the basics of the organization got lost. Efficiency was inverted, duplication rampant. Bottom line, the brand just didn't stand for anything anymore. Somehow the employees came to believe that they had ultimate spending authority, and most egregious, that my uncle wasn't entitled to see the expenditures. Well, my uncle's name is Sam. That organization is our country. The money is yours, and the guy who is leading the fiscal transparency revolution is in the room tonight. Adam Andrzejewski is the CEO and founder of OpenTheBooks.com, whose mission is to post government spending every dime online in real time. Isn't that elegant? It is. Before dedicating his life to real public service, Adam, not the public service people always talk about, Adam co-founded Homepages Directory, a $20 million publishing company that he and his brother built. Today, OpenTheBooks.com is the largest private repository of U.S. public sector spending. Open the Books believes that taxpayers have a constitutional right to government oversight. Crazy idea, huh? So they not only host this really incredible, accessible website where you can search salaries and pensions and checkbooks, but their auditing has resulted in assemblies of grand juries, indictments and successful prosecutions, congressional briefings, hearings, subpoenas, Government Accountability Office audits, Congressional Research Search Service reports, federal legislation, and a lot more. Open the Books Oversight Report reads like Ripley's Believe It or Not. I highly recommend you get your hands on a copy of that, but it will keep you up at night. So not everyone is so excited about this. After Adam had a little fact-check effort about Fauci, Adam, who was a senior policy contributor at Forbes, had his popular column canceled. In 2021, Open the Books filed 47,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. Can you just imagine 47,000, can you imagine the elves that Adam has working for him? It just must be, I can't wait to go see the factory someday. I'm thinking it's in the North Pole. He finally cracked open the books of the most reluctant state, because our comptroller, Betty Yee, was not too cooperative. If you could imagine, she said it couldn't be done. She said she wouldn't do it, but he did it. He filed hundreds of Freedom of Information requests, and he cracked open the books, and he now, because of this guy on stage, you can tell where your money's being spent in California tonight. Yeah. So Adam joined us in the gray days of the shutdown on Zoom, so I'm particularly excited tonight to be able to express in person Silicon Valley's gratitude for his work. Please help me thank and welcome transparency's best friend, Adam Angie-eff-ski.
It is great to be here with you this evening. Jane, thank you so much for being a good friend to our movement at OpenTheBooks.com, and thank you for that kind introduction. Keone, thank you. Members, guests, board members, thank you for this opportunity to share our mission and vision. If you and I are going to make America great again, we must make America accountable again. Over the course of the last 20 years, the size, scope, and power of government at all levels, at the federal, state, and local level, has grown substantially. And I know of no better example of that growth than right here in the state of California. Who knew that you can be an LA County lifeguard and make up to $510,000 a year? I guess life's a beach if you're an LA County lifeguard. Launching in my then column at Forbes and on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, our auditors at OpenTheBooks.com, we put Baywatch on Paywatch. We actually found 98 LA County lifeguards made more than $200,000 last year, and 20 of them made more than $300,000, and the top paid LA County lifeguard made $510,000 last year. And it's not only about the pay, but the pay was driven by the overtime. We actually found a single LA County lifeguard made, over a 6-year period, made nearly $1 million in overtime alone. And it's not only about the cash compensation, but it's also about the perks. The top paid LA County lifeguards, they had a take-home vehicle, Toyota Sequoias. And then it's also about the public paid, taxpayer paid lifetime public pension. 30 years and out, as early as age 55, on 80% of your cash compensation. So I don't have to tell you, California has a lot of problems. At OpenTheBooks.com, we frequently ask a single question: what government program is running well? Could it be the San Francisco Poop Patrol? There's 7 of those. They make up to $185,000 a piece at taxpayer cost. So we had noticed that London Breed was the new incoming mayor in 2017, and she came in under a political promise to literally clean the streets of San Francisco. So it was the summer of 2019, and our auditors thought, well, we're going to fact check the promise. And we noticed on the city website the 311 calls. The call logs of human waste in the public way were listed on the site. So we have this interactive mapping program. We downloaded the calls, and they came with latitude and longitude. So we plotted them on our interactive mapping platform, and yes, on every single case, we did plot it with a brown pen. The whole city was covered in brown. Let me tell you, there was a brownout in the Bay Area. A picture of that map trended on national Twitter. It was national news, international news, and I'm proud to say that that case study helped reframe the homeless debate not only in San Francisco, but across the country. Here's what the numbers looked like. In 2011, there was 5,000 cases of human waste in the public way, and by 2015, that number had grown to 13,000. By 2017, it had grown to 21,000, then 28,000, and in 2019, it was 31,000 cases of human waste in the public way. Over a 9-year period, we plotted 140,000 of those cases on city streets in San Francisco, and that is a human health catastrophe. Now, I know you're from California, you have green eye shade, you're jaded, and I understand, because I'm from Illinois, and it is the Super Bowl of corruption. In Illinois, our #1 manufactured product is corruption. Actually, on public policy and politics, if anything happens for the good of the people in Illinois, it's entirely by accident. And our governors, they have a historic reputation for corruption. In a recent period, 4 of our last 9 governors were indicted and served time in the federal penitentiary. 2013 was a particularly bad year for my state. We had 2 Illinois governors in the federal prison at the same time. One from each party, Democrat Rod Blagojevich and Republican George Ryan. And I remember when Rahm Emanuel promised to clean up the culture of corruption in City Hall. When Rahm Emanuel ran for mayor, he ran on 2 promises. One, to end the historic culture of corruption in City Hall, and number 2, to end the culture of pay-to-play. And you know what pay-to-play is. It's when you give campaign cash and expect a city contract. And sure enough, when Rahm won for office, he issued an executive order banning the practice. If you were a city vendor, you couldn't give him campaign cash. So in 2015, when he was running for office, our auditors at OpenTheBooks.com, we fact-checked Rahm Emanuel's executive order. And here's what we found. We took the City of Chicago checkbook, we matched it up with Rahm Emanuel's campaign donor disclosures, and we found that 600 city vendors gave Rahm Emanuel $7 million in campaign donations. And those vendors received $2 billion in city payments. In God we trust, Illinois politicians we must audit. And wouldn't you like to audit your governor right here in California, Gavin Newsom? Well, until this moment, you haven't had access to the data. You haven't had the tools to simply run an audit of Governor Gavin Newsom on his tax and spend decisions. But I'm here tonight with an historic announcement. For the first time in history, the books are open in the state of California. It was a knockdown, drag-out, 10-year dogfight to open up the line-by-line spending in the Golden State. And here's the story. We started with former California Comptroller John Chang, and he rejected our request. He said, his words, that he couldn't locate any of the 50 million bills they paid last year. And that's actually ridiculous. If you make the payment, you can track the payment. We filed the same request with the new California Comptroller, Betty Yee. She made the same argument. We can't locate the bills, and it's an undue burden to produce the record in our office. And so we got serious. In January of 2020, we sued Betty Yee in a Sacramento Superior Court, and we thought we had a diligent judge. But in the end, we lost our first transparency lawsuit ever. The judge bought their argument. We got nothing, nada, zip, not a single transaction. He bought their argument that it was an undue burden on her office to show you, the taxpayer, where California government spent your tax dollars last year. So we pivoted to Plan B. We filed 442 California open records requests on every single state agency. And they produced the responsive record, their line-by-line spending. And we compiled the California state checkbook like a jigsaw puzzle. We did what the governor, what the comptroller, what the attorney general that backed the governor, that backed the comptroller in court. We did what the state lawmakers, the state bureaucrats, and the Superior Court judge refused to do. We opened the line-by-line spending in the state of California. We opened the books. And what could be in $87 billion worth of spending that they didn't want you to see? Well, here's the first project we did. We took the California state vendor list and we matched it up with Governor Gavin Newsom's campaign donor disclosures, and here's what we found. We found that Governor Gavin Newsom engaged in the highly unethical practice of soliciting state vendors for campaign cash. Newsom solicited up to 1,000 state vendors who gave him $10.6 million worth of campaign donations, and in 1 year, those 1,000 vendors received $6.2 billion in state agency payments. Governor Gavin Newsom has pioneered the public financing of his campaign. You know, in September, the governor told you to set your thermostats at 78 degrees. The governor told you not to charge your electric car, your electric vehicle. Well, we found that 5 entrenched utility companies gave Governor Newsom $400,000 worth of campaign donations, and in 1 year, those 5 entrenched energy companies received $430 million worth of state agency payments. If you want better health care policy, you know the rising cost of health care is ripping and shredding at the American dream. And if you want better health care policy in California, you better follow the money. Because 7 major healthcare players, I'm talking the 2 Blues, United Healthcare, 7 major healthcare companies gave Governor Newsom $700,000 worth of campaign donations, and they received just last year $1.9 billion worth of state agency payments. So when you follow the money, you realize we have a lot of work to do. Despite the corruption in Illinois and in California, I am hopeful and optimistic about our future. And it's because in the last 5,000 years, you and I have been given the greatest gift. And that's a constitution that recognizes our rights come from God. They don't come from government. We instituted a government to secure our rights. And our founders knew that knowledge was power. And they knew the people needed the tools to be able to hold that government accountable. And so they wrote transparency into our founding documents. And it's Article 1, Section 9 of the United States Constitution, and it says that a regular statement and account of the receipts and expenditures of all public money shall be published from time to time. It's the internet age. There's a clear interpretation. Post every dime online in real time. Open the books. And that's our mission at OpenTheBooks.com, is to take every dime taxed and spent at every level of government across the entire country so people can hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions. So to that end, last year, our auditors filed 50,000 Freedom of Information Act requests. We captured $12 trillion in spending. So virtually, not quite, but virtually every dime taxed and spent at every level of government, federal, state, and local across the entire country, we've captured in our database, and you can search it for free on our website at OpenTheBooks.com. Here's what our database is comprised of. The federal checkbook all the way back to the year 2001. 50 out of 50 state checkbooks. Most of those states go back at least a decade. We've captured for the first time in American history virtually every single public employee and retiree salary and pension record where available across the country. 25 million public employees and retirees are posted with 3-year salary histories on our website. So when the Attorney General sicks the FBI on loud parents at school board meetings, we have the payroll of virtually every single K through 12 school district across the entire country. Start there, give oversight, and address your school board on the issue. In 15,000 local units of government, not only do we have their payrolls, but we also have their checkbook spending as well. And like I said, we do this so you can follow the money. Not only do we open the books, we audit the books, and the audits make national news. I want to share with you what we found when we were looking at the federal payrolls in January of 2021. We found that the top paid, most highly compensated federal employee was none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. We dropped everything. I wrote it up in my then column at Forbes. And many people had questions. They're like, how can Fauci, who's a director of a sub-agency, National Institutes of Health and Human Services, out-earn everybody? The President of the United States, 4-star generals in the United States military, and 4.3 million of his colleagues. And to get the answer to that question, we filed 4 Freedom of Information Act requests with the National Institutes of Health, and we learned that the Fauci finances are buried deeper than the presidential safe place. Those Freedom of Information Act requests were ignored. So we partnered with Judicial Watch and we sued NIH. And those lawsuits drug on for a year. And then NIH was dribbling the production, but they admitted they were holding 1,200 pages of the Fauci finances. His ethics and financial reports, his job description, his contract, amendments, modifications, and changes, and all sorts of different documents. Well, we kept briefing U.S. senators on this. And in January of this year, and you remember this Senate hearing with Fauci in the hot seat, the U.S. senator from Kansas blew up Fauci's payroll check in the background, and he had Fauci in the hot seat for 5 minutes on his finances. We suggested to the senator, don't tip him. You know, the Senate is very collegial. They'll give him the questions in advance. We said this just might be Fauci's code red moment. And it was very uncomfortable. And Fauci misled the senator and he misled Congress. Fauci said that his ethics and financial reports were public knowledge, that for 50 years it was easy to find his financial information. And it wasn't true. We were suing for that information. They owed us 1,200 pages of that information, and Fauci misled Congress. And at the end of that, on the hot mic, Fauci melted down. He called the U.S. Senator a moron, and it was the top news story of the day. You can't be America's top doctor if you're melting down on national television. This was Fauci's code red moment, and we at OpenTheBooks.com, we had a big stake in that moment. U.S. Senator Roger Marshall, he helped us break open the ethics and financial reports, and so in September, we were able to show how Fauci profited from the pandemic. We empirically showed at OpenTheBooks.com that Fauci's net worth during the pandemic went from $7.6 million to $12.6 million. He gained $5 million between 2019 and 2021, and a big driver of that was the $1 million cash prize from the foreign nonprofit, the Dan David Foundation in Israel, for speaking truth to power during the Trump years and for defending science. At OpenTheBooks.com, we also filed a Freedom of Information Act request with the National Institutes of Health for their third-party royalty payments. Now, during the pandemic, you and I started to feel that Big Pharma, quite possibly, was very close to big government. And now we know exactly how close they were. So we filed for their... So in our data at OpenTheBooks.com, we saw that the National Institutes of Health, on grants, every year, they dole out $30 billion to researchers, healthcare, pharmaceutical companies. That buys you a lot of friends. That buys you a lot of allies. That basically buys you the United States healthcare industry. And now, coming back through the other door, we know that over the course of the last decade, $325 million of third-party royalties were paid to NIH, the agency, its leaders, and 2,405 of its scientists. So let's get this right. Every year, NIH doles out tens of billions of dollars worth of grants, and then every 10 years, hundreds of millions of dollars comes back to the agency, enriching everybody. And we only know this because of our federal lawsuit. You see, NIH ignored that Freedom of Information Act request. We sued them with Judicial Watch. We got 3,000 pages worth of line-by-line royalties. And you know about this because within 36 hours of us breaking this, Congressman John Molinare had the acting director of NIH in the House budget hearing. And Molinare had Lawrence Tabak, the acting director of NIH, there, and Tabak admitted after about 3 minutes, yes, every single line could be a potential conflict of interest, but trust us, we have firewalls. And you know about this third-party royalty issue because Rand Paul's had Fauci in the hot seat in 2 U.S. Senate hearings, and Fauci refuses to answer the questions. And I can tell you we know the top line that over the 10-year period was $325 million, but I can't tell you who the companies were that paid it. They're knocking out and redacting on the 3,000 pages the third-party payer, think name of pharmaceutical company. I know there's 2,405 scientists, but I can't tell you how much each one of those scientists received individually. They're knocking out the individual payment. And I can't tell you what they invented. The patent number and the license number, they're redacting that as well. And that's why Rand Paul says that they're going to change the rules and create transparency. He's going to subpoena that record. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. So on a quarterly basis, we come out with federal oversight reports. And one of these reports is getting a lot of national attention right now. It's called the Militarization of the Federal Agencies. And we've been doing this report since 2016. Here's what we know from our data. That since 2006, the federal agencies outside of the Department of Defense have spent $2.7 billion on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. Now, 27 of those agencies are traditional law enforcement agencies underneath the Department of Homeland Security or the Department of Justice. But 76 of those agencies are rank-and-file traditional paper-pushing agencies like the IRS. And we know that since 2006, the IRS has spent $21.3 million purchasing guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. The entire federal complex on this has grown substantially. There are now 200,000 federal agents with arrest and firearm authority, and that number eclipses the number of United States Marines at 186,000. At the IRS, we broke down their gun locker, and here's what we found. In their gun locker, they have in storage 5 million rounds of ammunition. The IRS owns 4,600 guns, and if you break that number down, they own 621 shotguns, 529 long-barrel rifles, and 15 submachine guns. And you and I were treated to the national news headlines when Congress, the Democratic Congress, appropriated $80 billion to hire 87,000 new IRS agents. And then they're ramping up their hiring of their special agents. And you saw the headline on Twitter that a job requirement for their special agent is to use deadly force. We believe that transparency revolutionizes United States public policy and politics. At the IRS, our findings on the militarization of the IRS has led to congressional legislation to disarm the IRS. So when you have transparency, you got to couple it up with the ability to fight. We have to fight on hard facts. And I want to share with you, so in 2010, I ran for governor of Illinois. And I lost that election. It was my only run for office. I ran for the top job after a successful year of being an entrepreneur. And on the Friday before the Tuesday election, I had one of the greatest political privileges in my lifetime when I welcomed into Chicago a couple of the founders of Polish Solidarity, Lech Wałęsa and Mieczysław Gill. And they told us how to fight. They told us what was necessary. Here's the story that they told. They said in the early days of Solidarity, nobody gave them a chance. Nobody thought that they could end communism on a peaceful basis. And Wałęsa said that the naysayers were correct. If you looked at the communists and their power, the guns, the airplanes, the tanks, the machine guns, they didn't stand a chance. If you looked at recent Polish history, if you stood up, you literally got shot down. But Wałęsa said the men of Solidarity, the women of Solidarity, they had one thing that the naysayers didn't understand. They had stronger principles and they had stronger values. And when I look at you tonight, this crowd, I understand. We know how to fight, and we have stronger principles, and we have stronger values. And that's what it's going to take. We believe in the power of transparency, and at OpenTheBooks.com, we try to weigh in on nearly all the national issues with hard data to shine a bright, white-hot spotlight. So, obviously, over the course of the last 2 years, a national issue has been the defund the police movement. Today, it's been largely discredited, and we had a stake in that. Last summer, we actually filed 25 Freedom of Information Act requests on the largest cities in the country. They were all run by Democrats. We asked if they defunded their police, and then we also asked what they did with their mayor's police protection detail. And they're hypocrites. This is what we found. In New York City, Mayor Bill de Blasio, they stripped $1 billion off of the police budget of $6 billion. And when de Blasio ran for president, he brought his mayoral police detail with him on the campaign trail, costing taxpayers hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's police protection for me, but not for thee in the neighborhoods. In San Francisco, Mayor London Breed, we took a look at what she did. They stripped $120 million in San Francisco from their police budget. We took a look at how much Breed's police detail had escalated over the base year of 2017, and she was up by $1 million a year. Again, police protection for me, but not for thee in the neighborhoods. Chicago, Lori Lightfoot. She says she's against defunding the police. But what we noticed was she had quietly cut the head count of officers between 2019 and 2020 when there was civil unrest in the city of Chicago and looting. The thin blue line was a lot thinner. They had quietly trimmed 400 police officers from the payrolls. Oftentimes we hold politicians to account not only for their promises but also for their results. It was about a year ago in August of 2021 when we noticed that the Taliban was advancing on Afghanistan. And we wanted to know one question: how much U.S. taxpayer-paid military gear was going to be left behind? And so we nailed that number. We made national and international news. I did 3 minutes leading the Sunday broadcast of the BBC. Fox News ran it 8 to 12 times. The Washington Post, when they fact-checked politicians on the number, they were linking to our research. And it was $82.9 billion over a 20-year period of U.S. taxpayer-paid military gear and training into the national Afghan army and security forces. So let's break that number down. It was 600,000 weapons, and that's 350,000 M4 and M16 rifles, 65,000 machine guns, 22,000 grenade launchers, and 2,600 mortars and howitzers. A mortar and a howitzer is a modern-day cannon. It can take out a bridge, an airport runway, or a road. We left behind 75,000 military vehicles. It was 50,000 light and medium tactical vehicles. It was 22,000 Humvees. Each Humvee cost the American taxpayer, on average, $93,000 for each Humvee. We left behind 1,000 mine-resistant vehicles. Those cost between $300,000 and $750,000. And if we ever go back into Afghanistan, we've lost the nighttime advantage. We left behind very sophisticated night vision equipment, 16,000 pieces. Now, the Bible has a phrase. The Bible says the truth will set you free. It doesn't say the narrative will set you free. But the Biden administration was running the narrative that this was the most successful extraction of a military force in all of human history. And it wasn't true. And we used hard data and government audit reports to tell the American people the truth and to hold the Biden administration accountable. Right now in America, there is a new arms race. Who is going to use transparency to open up? Who? Are we going to use transparency to open up government and hold them accountable? Or are we going to let the private sector be opened up using the latest in technology? At OpenTheBooks.com, we level the playing field. We open up government to level the playing field. And remember back to Reagan's farewell address. When Reagan left the presidency, he said the reason that his administration was successful is because they empowered the American people. He used the analogy that the people are the driver and government is the car. And the people are supposed to tell the government how fast to go, when to turn, and importantly, when to stop. Reagan said they were successful because they re-empowered the American people. And that's what transparency does. It levels the playing field and empowers people with the information to hold government accountable. Last month in the Wall Street Journal, we paid for a full-page editorial detailing the government at all levels and their war on transparency. And here are some of the examples in our editorial. First off, the Biden administration has redacted 350,000 names from the federal executive agency payroll. And that's up from 2,300 redactions during the Obama administration. Today, we estimate $30 billion of federal payroll is hidden in the swamp, and we don't know who received how much of that. Second example. The second example, the Federal Reserve. I know of no federal agency more important during a recession or during a period of inflation than the Federal Reserve. So we requested their payroll and their checkbook. The Federal Reserve employs 23,000 employees. They turned over 369. They said the rest of them, it's private information, and we vehemently disagree. The Federal Reserve, of all people, said they don't have a checkbook. The Office of Vice President believes they're immune from the Federal Freedom of Information Act. You file a request with them, they don't produce anything. And we're going to have to sue the Office of Vice President to open them up for the first time in history. But the war on transparency is bipartisan. In South Dakota, Governor Kristi Noem, we filed a request for the state agency payrolls, and they rejected it. They said there's an administrative rule. Even though the law says there's transparency of public employees in the state of South Dakota, they force you under the administrative rule to use a state website where you can only look up one employee at a time, and you have to know their name. If I'm a government employee in South Dakota, no one would ever know my salary because no one could ever spell Angie-eff-ski. Before we put this example in the Wall Street Journal, we reached out to her top lawyer or general counsel to see if they would cure this anti-transparency administrative rule, and they declined. Earmarks. About 18 months ago, the Republican minority caucus took a secret vote on earmarks, and 102 Republicans voted to join Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats to bring back the currency of corruption in Congress, to bring back earmarks. You know what an earmark is. It's a member pet project doled out by the Speaker to bring across votes on big spending bills, to make them bipartisan. Bringing back earmarks does one thing. It empowers the House Speaker, and 102 Republicans in that secret vote voted to bring back the currency of corruption. And as soon as they did that, 23 newly elected freshmen, they were elected in 2020 as fiscal conservatives, they requested of Pelosi over $400 million worth of earmarks in their district. Aren't you fed up with big bills in Congress, these big, massive omnibus, minibus, massive expenditure bills? Well, so am I. And about a year ago, up in Congress was the Build Back Better bill. And Senate Democrats said it would cost $1.7 trillion. Republicans said it would cost, the permanent cost would be $4.7 trillion. And President Joe Biden said it would cost nothing. So this was a bill that needed transparency. So at OpenTheBooks.com, we paid for a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal to educate the American people on that bill. Here's what we found. $7 billion would have created a climate corps to put the climate cop on the doorstep of your home. Tax breaks for the Democratic political constituencies, the trial lawyers, the unions, the media, and the wealthy states like California, the Democratic political power base of California, New York, Illinois, and New Jersey. We also found that the Biden administration was serious about enforcing their edicts. They wanted to raise the fines at OSHA. Remember, they wanted to do a vaccine mandate on private employers with 100 or more employees. And how they were going to do that was they were raising the fines at OSHA from $70,000 to $700,000. So it was 2,466 pages. We read that bill, we compiled this, we published this at the Wall Street Journal, and here's what the National Review said about the ad. They said the final straw, the last nail in the coffin, was the educational ad by the organization of OpenTheBooks.com as published at the Wall Street Journal, and I'm proud of that work. We stopped that bill. You know, at the height of the pandemic, when fear was raging, they passed the massive $2 trillion CARES Act. And in that bill was economic stimulus payments of $1,200. And the IRS was in charge of mailing out those payments. But they didn't check with Social Security. Social Security keeps a deceased persons list. And the IRS mailed out 2.2 million checks to dead people. It cost the American taxpayer $3.5 billion. Why have a deceased persons list at Social Security if you don't check the list before you cut the check? Paycheck Protection Program, PPP funding. This was administered by the Small Business Administration. Over at Treasury, they keep a do not pay list. And the Small Business Administration didn't check the do not pay list, and they paid 57,000 entities on the do not pay list $3.6 billion. Again, why have a do not pay list if you don't check the list before you cut the check? In the COVID aid programs, it is probably the largest public fraud ever in the history of the country. Estimates run up to $600 billion that have been scammed by criminals, con artists, and crime syndicates from around the world. It is an open question as whether the Chinese military hackers stole enough COVID aid to fund their military budget for the next year. That amount would have been $200 billion. It is an open question as to whether or not hackers in Russia stole enough to fund Vladimir Putin's military budget for an entire year. That would be $80 billion. And what wasn't stolen oftentimes was gamed. And you're going to see this hopefully in the national news over the course of the next few days. So I'll break news right now for you. There was 25,000 lawyers and accountants that were paid $13 billion of forgiven PPP loans. We crunched the top 300 law firms in the country and the 300 top accounting firms in the country, and they received 370 law firms and accounting firms in the top 300 received $1.4 billion. You got the third largest accounting firm in the country, Ernst & Young, and they took $750,000 forgiven on a PPP loan for their location in Guam. I tell you, the elites in this country, they have sold us out at every level. It is up to you and I to right the ship. It is a target-rich environment on waste, fraud, corruption, and taxpayer abuse. And about every year we do a report, a federal oversight report called Where's the Pork? And here are some of the instances that we've found over the course of the last couple of years. We found that Fauci, heading up the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, gave a grant for $500,000 to turn monkeys transgender. NASA took $1 million to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. And my favorite grant was out of Health and Human Services for $1.4 million sent for sex education to California prostitutes who could probably teach the class. And speaking of prostitutes, the Ivy League. You know, the Ivy League soaked up $170 million worth of COVID aid, but they didn't need taxpayer help. They have nearly $200 billion collectively, the 8 schools of the Ivy League, in their endowments. And there's a lot of waste in their federal grant making. For instance, Cornell University, They took $1 million on a study, where it hurts the most to be stung by a bee. Turns out it's the nostril. I read the study. Look, we need a simple reform in Congress with these big, massive spending bills that nobody knows what's in there. We need a 72-hour timeout. This is common sense. The people, the politicians, the press, we need time to read the bill. So come to our website. We've got a petition, the petition tab across the top, and sign the petition to mandate Congress to simply read the bill. And this has been turned into a Senate resolution with Rick Scott, and he takes it a step further, and I think it's good policy. And the Senate resolution would require an affidavit from the U.S. Senator that they actually read the bill. All right, I want to close with the following story. The national rollout of OpenTheBooks.com was accomplished with the help and partnership of a legendary former U.S. Senator, Dr. Tom Coburn. And it was Coburn in 2006 that had partnered with then Illinois Senator Barack Obama. They did the legislation to open the federal checkbook for the first time in history. And Coburn was a real champion, and he exercised real courage in the United States Senate. So Coburn, he stopped thousands of wasteful bills, earning the nickname Dr. No. What he couldn't stop in the United States Senate, he would embarrass his colleagues. Every single year he'd publish a waste book report to embarrass his colleagues and the big spenders. By 2013, this small state senator, U.S. Senator from Oklahoma, he was listed on the Time 100 most influential persons in the world list because transparency and accountability is popular, and he was carrying that flag. When Coburn left the Senate, he told the following story. He gave all of us a warning. Coburn was a doctor back home in a small town in Oklahoma, and he delivered 3,000 babies. And Coburn said, on the law of large numbers, sometimes you'd run into a problem. And you knew there was a problem in labor and delivery when the baby's heartbeat, which is normally 130 to 140 beats a minute, would drop to 50 or 60 beats a minute. Coburn said, when that happened, you had to make a decision. You had 3 minutes to take action, to save the life of the mother, to save the life of the baby. Coburn said you had options. You could go for the forceps. You could use the vacuum extractor. You could put the mother up on the table, cut a hole in her belly, and deliver the baby by C-section. But the point was, you had 3 minutes. You had 3 minutes to take action. And Coburn said, on debt and spending in this country now, this is our 3-minute moment. If we don't take action, we're going to lose the baby. Join us at OpenTheBooks.com. Let's lock arms and fight these battles together. Thank you.
So let's start with this redaction stuff.
Yeah.
I just can't wrap my mind around it. Fauci's calendar, for instance, you got that revealed, which was tremendous, and there was a lot redacted. Now, I don't know if that was his yoga classes and his wedding planning. We know that that's often redacted from government information. But what happens with the redactions, and I'm going to throw the slow rolls in there, how they slow roll you and then they dribble out this information. Is there a way Americans can challenge that?
Yeah, you have to fight hard, and you have to sue them, and you have to stay the course. So let's talk about the redactions on the third-party paid royalties, okay? Because this is a strategy. They ignore your Freedom of Information Act request, and they force you into expensive taxpayer-paid litigation before you can get the information to show taxpayers where their tax dollars are being spent. Okay, so at National Institutes of Health, you have taxpayer-paid scientists working in taxpayer-paid labs that come up with inventions. And then they license the inventions to the private sector for application, and then the private sector, think pharmaceutical company, pays royalties back to NIH, the agency, and then the agency doles out a percent of those royalties to the scientist. What we learned is that the royalties go in perpetuity to the scientist. So if you leave the agency, you get to keep your royalties. If you die, your estate inherits the royalties. The royalties keep getting paid when you go to heaven. So NIH is acting like they have a lot to hide. So I told you the acting director, Lawrence Tabak, in the House hearing with Congressman Molinare, when he's asking him about the largessa royalties, he finally admits that, yes, every single one has the appearance of a conflict of interest, but trust us, we have firewalls in place to preserve the ethics. And we don't believe it. We need to be able to follow the money. And I'll tell you why. So right now, they're redacting the name of the payer. They're redacting the amount to the individual scientist. I can only see the top line numbers, so we're able to quantify the total. And they're redacting the invention, okay? But from the outside, here's some fact patterns we've already assembled. We've got an NIH scientist that has an invention that leaves the agency, starts a for-profit business, and licenses back his own invention. So he's paying royalties back to the agency, which he's collecting, but then he's monetizing his invention in the private sector. The last time this database had full transparency was 2005, 17 years ago. I saw this. This is why we filed the request. And there was scandal. The Associated Press got the full database unredacted. And they found that in a 5-year period, Dr. Anthony Fauci collected $45,000 worth of royalties on a drug that he had made decisions. They put $36 million into the development of that drug, and that on its face is a conflict of interest, and Fauci admitted as much when called out on it and said he would donate his royalties to charity. Again, says who with what proof? We need to see the unredacted database, and Dr. Rand Paul, U.S. Senator, is going to fight to make sure that that happens.
Question from the audience. How much government spending how much money, government money, was spent on pushing the vaccines?
I don't know the answer to that question. You know, it's probably hundreds of millions of dollars, that's for sure. So I don't know the answer to that question on vaccines.
Okay. So what is the cleanest state? Is there any good news? Is there any character at all in government?
So over the course of the last 10 years, every single government unit, I don't care if it's your local school district, junior college, state government, program within the state government, federal agency, every single time we've audited a unit of government, we have found massive problems with it. Not one single time did we find it running well. And that's why it's incumbent upon each of us to take a look at the spending, review the spending, especially on a local basis. You see, you can't complain about Sacramento or Washington, D.C. unless you have good government where you live, where you have connections, where you understand the players, and where you can look at a vendor list and see the connections. Until we have good government where we live, we can't complain about the state or the federal government, because they're just a symptom of where we live.
So you talked about the Read the Bill initiative, and I hope we'll all go online and look at Adam's petition. They want you to read the bill before you sign it. That's a crazy thing. I know Nancy Pelosi said you could see what's in it after you read it, but yeah. It's really not like a fortune cookie or something. You don't have to wait till after dinner. But what about, Adam, what about having them not just have legal responsibility for this, but what if they have to initial every single page and say, I have read and considered the consequences of the above?
Yeah, well, hey, you know, I think they work for us, and so whatever the people determine is proper, I say let's go for it. And I say keep the standard high, you know, raise the bar, because right now, I mean, nobody even knows what's in this stuff. Nobody.
So here's a question. Who benefited from the funds used to pay, quote, dead people?
So this is kind of an interesting circumstance. Like I said, the IRS, they didn't check with Social Security on the deceased persons list. They mail out 2.2 million checks to dead people. They realize what they've done, so what do? They hit the media, and they ask for the relatives to mail back the checks. But of course, dead people are notoriously bad at mailing things back. There are 78,000 honest people in the country that did mail their check back out of 2.2 million. So they saved just a fraction of the money. Most of the $3.5 billion was deposited and spent.
Those darn dead people. Well, okay. One audience member, I have to tell you, Adam, the truth is, unless you have grandchildren here, you talk about moving every week, okay? That's what we do. Right? That's become our hobby. Where are we going to move to? They say that Newsom works for U-Haul.
That's good.
So one of the questions from our audience is, do the checkbooks of Texas and Florida look any better?
Okay, I mean, there's corruption everywhere. There's corruption in Florida, there's corruption in Texas, but let's talk about some figures here. Okay, so 2 years ago, it's much higher now, but 2 years ago, we took a look at six-figure public employees in California, and we found 350,000 at the state and local level. This doesn't include the federal employees based in California, but just public employees at the state and local level in California. There's 350,000 that make six figures, $100,000 or more. Let's put that in comparison to Florida. Florida's about half the population of California, but there was only 50,000 six-figure public employees. And what that means is that the heavy boot of government in Florida is a lot lighter. There was about 75,000 employees in the state of Texas. Again, the heavy boot of government is a lot lighter. Now, we just crunched the numbers in Illinois. We came out with this over the course of the last couple of weeks. We made a board editorial at the Wall Street Journal. Illinois is public employee union heaven. That was the title of the Wall Street Journal editorial. We found 133,000 in Illinois public employees or retirees made $100,000 or more.
I don't know what to do with these numbers. What are you guys doing with these numbers? All right. Adam, I know you know a little bit of something about the governor and his wife's finances and the campaign funds. Could you share that with our audience? There's a question about that.
Okay. So while Governor Gavin Newsom was soliciting state vendors for campaign cash, Mrs. Newsom, Jennifer Siebel Newsom, was soliciting state vendors for donors to her public charity. Now let's put this in perspective. I mean, at least the Clintons, in the waning years of his presidency, first opened up the Clinton Foundation. The Newsoms have started slightly before he was even elected governor. So Jennifer Siebel Newsom starts a public charity, a 501c3 called the Representation Project. And they do movies starring her husband, Gavin Newsom, who is in 2 of them. In these movies, they also do school curriculum. So they say on their website they're in 5,000 schools. Their movies and curriculum have been licensed 11,200 times, and they've reached 2.6 million students in the K-12 school district. We reached out to them. We asked them how many of those schools are in California, and they refused to answer. So you've got some of the biggest state vendors recycling a piece of their profits, not only into the governor's campaign fund, but also into his wife's public charity. For example, you've got AT&T, Comcast, Kaiser Permanente, Planned Parenthood, PG&E giving Jennifer Siebel Newsom's charity between $15,000 and $360,000 apiece. Okay, Jennifer Siebel Newsom has also monetized her public charity personally. Since 2013, she's taken $1.5 million personally in salary. She's also taken another $1.6 million in payments to her for-profit entity, Girls Club Entertainment. So that's $3.1 million that flowed back to Jennifer Siebel Newsom personally. Now you take a look at their curricula, and I can tell you it is obscene and it is disgusting. They're delivering pornography. The governor's wife, with the governor starring in these films, with the curriculum, they're delivering pornography to middle schoolers.
Can you believe we're having a conversation about finances and we have the word pornography and we're all like, oh yeah, that's our state, that's our governor. I have a little, I was thinking maybe I would go work for Newsom's campaign. What do you guys think about this? I thought of a little, I thought of a little tagline. I thought maybe I could work for him because I know he wants to run for president. I thought it would be great. His campaign line could be, Newsom, I'll do to America what I did to my best friend's wife. You guys like it?
I want to share another Gavin Newsom
Please
story.
do.
Okay. So you have seen in the press that Governor Newsom, I mean, he is a big advocate of the film industry here in California. Governor Newsom advocates very, very strongly for the California film and TV tax credits. Every single 5 years in the period, it's about $330 million doled out to film and TV studios as long as they film shows here in the state of California. So we've taken a look over the, since 2020, who are the biggest recipients of the California film and TV tax credits. And number one is Netflix. Netflix, since 2020, has received $143 million worth of film tax credits. And Reed Hastings and Patty Quinlan, Patty Quinlan's his wife, Reed Hastings, the CEO and founder of Netflix, is one of Gavin Newsom's top campaign donors. As a matter of fact, the employees, the executives, the political action committees of the 5 top studios have given Governor Newsom $1.1 million worth of campaign cash. Netflix, so Reed Hastings and Patty Quinlan, they put $3 million alone into the Stop the Recall effort on Newsom in 2021. One of the top tax credits was received by Netflix for none other than the streaming film series 13 Reasons Why. It's about teen suicide. The National Institutes of Health, of all people, did the study that in the month when 13 Reasons Why debuted on television, teen suicides spiked by 28%. That was the biggest period of a spike they'd ever measured in the last 5 years. And the taxpayers in California, through Governor Newsom, you are subsidizing that kind of content.
Another question from the audience. When was the last time the U.S. Treasury was audited?
I want to audit, I want to audit the Fed. That's why we filed the checkbook request on the Federal Reserve. We don't have to wait for an act of Congress. I know that, Rand Paul and his father and, they want to audit the Fed, but they can't get the bill passed. It's up to us. Let's get it done. But here's the problem. They rejected our request. They said they don't have a checkbook. And this is mystifying. They rejected the request, but they said, however, if you have the name of an individual, a vendor, we'll look it up for you. So I asked for clarification. I said, if you can look it up, you have a searchable database. That's what we want a copy of. And 3 times on email, we went back and forth. And I never got further than the answer, if you have they just pivoted right on that. If you have the name of the vendor, we'll look it up for you. We need to sue them on this. We need to open the books at the Federal Reserve, and then we need to audit those books.
One of our audience members asked, is there any way of understanding really what the cost of illegal aliens is? Is there anyone tracking those dollars?
So that's something that we, in 2023, we want to do the oversight report on that. We want to develop the methodology to empirically measure the taxpayer cost of illegal immigration in this country. Many people have tried, and the media tends to poke holes in the studies. We are hopeful that we can develop a defendable methodology to determine the taxpayer cost.
Okay. There's a specific question about California, and that is, have you opened the books on California's earthquake authority? They say there's massive money laundering.
Okay. If it's a state agency, we have their spending. So we're only missing 20 state agencies. They're all junior colleges here in the state of California that have either rejected the request or we just can't get them to answer our request. So we do need to circle back on these 20 smaller schools. It doesn't represent a material representation of the whole. We got 201,600 state vendors, $87.1 billion worth of state spending. But we do, we're serious about enforcing transparency law, so we do have to circle back on these 20 junior colleges here in the state of California. But if that earthquake agency, if they're a state agency, we have their spending, and we would be able to give that to you. You could audit it, or we could be involved in that as well. Now, I think the California junior colleges are just plain mad at us. And here's why. During the summer, we found that there are 65,000 fake students enrolled in the California junior college system. Fake students take seats in the classroom from real students. Fake students are closing out classes that real students want to take. Can't we all agree that college students should be real? The average junior college student in California soaks up $5,000 a year worth of federal and state student aid. That means, look, 65,000 students, that's the number admitted by the state agency at the California junior college system. They admit 65,000 students. At $5,000, that's $900 million a year in stolen financial aid. So the stakes are high.
Excuse me, Adam, did you say $900 million?
900 million. 65,000 times 5,000. So here's the deal. The colleges don't want to open the books, and they don't even want to look at it, because if the money's stolen, they have to pay it back. So there's no incentive for them to go after the fake students.
Raise your hand if you want your money back. So, Adam, what you're saying is all you have to do is identify as real in California, right? Is that how it works? Okay.
Some of these fake students are obvious to spot. They have names like Obama or Trump, things like that.
Oh, my Lord. Do you have energy for a few more questions?
Yeah.
Okay. Can you give a little bit more specifics on the NIH getting paid by pharma companies and the royalty and the propaganda, or all that, the royalty payments back and forth? Can you fill us in a little bit deeper?
So the NIH scientists, they're taxpayer paid, the labs are taxpayer paid, they come up with an invention, and then they license it to the private sector then pays royalties back. So every year NIH is doling out $30 billion, which is a stunning amount of grant making to the research, healthcare, pharmaceutical industry in the country. And then coming back through the other door now over a 10-year period was $325 million worth of these third-party paid royalties. It's all a conflict of interest. So during the pandemic, if you thought Big Pharma was close to big government, your suspicions were correct. And because of our work now, we know just how close they are.
Adam, I'm not sure if this is in your wheelhouse, but do you want to comment on the FTX debacle? Is this counterfeit and stolen money being used for lobbying and corruption. Do you want to comment on
So
this?
I'm not a subject matter expert on cryptocurrency. I just basically figured out, kind of the flow of funds about 6 months ago. So I'm not a subject matter expert on FTX.
All right, we'll bring you back in a couple years and you'll be a next subject matter expert on that. There's obviously great concern about the legitimacy of the votes. And if we had someone like Adam looking at the books of our elections, things would be really different, right? Do you see a role for that?
So we stay in our swim lane at OpenTheBooks.com. We follow the money. I mean, you should know that election commissions, they are subject to open records and sunshine requests. So if you, for instance, last month we filed a request for the last 3 years of line-by-line payments. We realized it wasn't in our database at the Chicago Board of Elections. And so now we have that. We post it online, and so everybody can check that. They said they mailed out 500,000 overseas ballots. Well, we want to see the postage for that to see if that happened. You want to fact-check statements, and you fact-check the statements with hard proof. If I say it, you can doubt it. But if government says it, it's the truth. So you always want to use their data.
There's several questions here that basically can be boiled down to, why aren't these people in jail?
Yeah, I mean, there's a real...
prison, not jail.
There's a real lack of accountability, right? In the private sector, I mean, if you get, it used to be, I don't know if it's still that way in San Francisco or Los Angeles, but it used to be if you got out of line, I mean, in the private sector, you were slapped. You couldn't steal a TV. I mean, there would be consequences. In the public sector, we don't see that. I mean, at OpenTheBooks.com, we have been responsible for, people that were indicted, pled guilty, served time in prison, lost their public pension, had to pay restitution. I mean, so we do see a little of that, but not enough. I mean, the people are clamoring for equal treatment of the public sector. And all of this, look, if you're a top 300 law firm in this country, and we're going to break this story, their revenues from 2019 through 2020 and 2021 went up or at worst remained flat. They weren't going out of business. They weren't going to lay off their employees. But the top 10 law firms soaked up $100 million of forgiven PPP loans. And I think the feds need to forensic audit those law firms, and if they lied on their applications, they need to claw those dollars back, and those principals need to be held accountable.
And disbarred. Wow. Okay, well, Adam, I want to give you an opportunity to talk about Waste of the Week, because that's fun.
So at Real Clear, every single day, we post the Waste of the Day at Real Clear Politics. And we've been doing this since February of 2021. So we're coming up on 2 years shortly. There's all kinds of things in that Waste of the Day column. And then it's syndicated on 200 ABC, NBC, and CBS stations across the country within this Sinclair broadcast network. On Fridays, they syndicate 2 on the Waste of the Week segments from that Real Clear column. So we're able to put that right in people's living rooms, right in their, as they watch network news, right on their couch. We're able to show people exactly how their government is spending their money. Look, if progressives and too many Republicans, by the way, in this country, if they say government can solve problems, and if government can spend your tax dollars better than what you can spend your own tax dollars to help solve real problems, I say prove it. Where's the proof? Government is naturally wasteful. Like I say, I've never audited a government program and found it running well. If they're going to tax you and spend your money, they have an obligation to you, the taxpayer, to spend honestly, frugally, and to help people who have real needs. And we don't find the evidence of that anywhere. And my whole mission is to educate the American people on how inept and incompetent government is at all levels.
So we'll have our last question, and then Adam is available to speak with you personally or just to visit with you a little bit before he heads to the airport for a few minutes. Adam, we always end with what can we do? And in particular, we want to know what we can do besides send checks, but send checks, send checks, send checks to Adam. You know why? Because he's not going to waste your money. He's really not going to waste your money. He's got so much integrity and passion. That's a good place to send a check.
So I'll just interrupt with it. So at the height of, when fear was the greatest, at the height of the pandemic, I had our auditors crunch just for the talking point. See, we don't take government money, but I wanted to know at OpenTheBooks.com how much Paycheck Protection PPP loan we could take, and 95% of them were forgiven. It would have become a grant. We would have had ours forgiven too. We could have qualified for $300,000 at OpenTheBooks.com worth of PPP money, subsidized by taxpayers. But that would have compromised our mission. We're government watchdogs. We can't be funded by the government. That would compromise our entire mission. So I'm proud. We had the network and the wherewithal to be able to weather the storm, but it got tight. For the first time in 5 years, I had to dig into my own wallet and put $30,000. I had to loan the business so we could make payroll. Our chairman matched me at $30,000 before we turned it around and had the biggest year ever on revenue, on donations in 2020 at OpenTheBooks.com. But we got through without the government money. I want to contrast that story to what the Seattle Times did on one of the most red-hot news cycles ever in the last 100 years. You had a national pandemic raging, and you had the Capitol Hill protest going on in Seattle, where they took over, a section of the city. The red-hot news cycle in Seattle. And what did the Seattle Times do? There are 614 Seattle companies that received between $1 million and $10 million worth of forgiven PPP loans. And the Seattle Times took 2 loans. Both were forgiven for $11.8 million worth of forgiven loans. It used to be in this country, we had a tradition of an independent media, that journalists were independent of government, not subsidized by government. So this week, on the largest news station, KOMO in Seattle, I called on the Seattle Times editorial board to justify how they were subsidized to the tune of nearly $12 million by taxpayers, and how does that not compromise your independence?
Adam, I was teasing you that it was the last question because you just opened up another one. How did it ever get called? Why do they use the word forgiven and loan? Like, why do they even call them loans?
Yeah, 95% of them were quote unquote forgiven, right? So they became like a grant. They were subsidized by taxpayers. So that whole program was about $800 billion.
Excuse me, but did they use the word loan for a legal reason? Because they weren't going to get any of the money back. So why did they call it that?
Well, it was a loan because if you spent it outside of the requirements of the program, then you had to pay it back. But as long as you spent it on payroll or to cover your mortgage or to cover your rent or other qualified expenses, it turned into a grant.
Yeah. I'm sure that's all being audited.
Look, I think you had to have a need. Maybe that has to be litigated, but I think you had to have a need, for the money. And so I think all that needs to be audited, and the quote unquote loan applications need to be audited on what promises the businesses made in order to accept millions of dollars.
Okay. So I'd like you to give some direction to our audience. Everybody wants to know what they can do, specifically if they see financial irresponsibility. And what would you like these people to do tomorrow morning when they wake up, Adam?
So here's the 3 or the 4-point plan that has led to 500 resignations in Illinois of public officials or elected officials. And I think it's the best watchdog model, bar none, in the entire country. First point, open the books. You got to look at the line-by-line spending. You got to look at the payrolls. When you do, you will have questions. And ask say it's a school district, the superintendent of the school district, your questions. Oftentimes, the answer to the question, you'll have to go to a public meeting because they won't answer your question. They can't defend their spending. You'll have to go to a public meeting to answer the question. And you'll have to network up to 50 to 500 of your friends, your neighbors, your relatives into those public meetings. That's a media event. That creates pressure. That forces them to defend their spending. You're going to want to know, where in the law do you get the power to make that expenditure? If they don't have statutory authority, it is illegal spending. In the face of answering that one question alone, 500 Illinois public officials and elected officials have fled their post. So that's the best watchdog model in the country, and that's what you and I need to be running in our own local units of government.
Ladies and gentlemen, this man is literally fighting for the health of our nation on so many levels. Please help me thank the gracious, tenacious warrior for transparency, Adam Angie-eff-ski.
Thank you very much. You've been great. I appreciate it. Let's fight these battles together. Thank you.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.